the presence of the ruler of the great tomb of Nazareth. With a sense of regret for not being able to sense her master, Shaltir turned her head back, and found that the human with a screw loose in his head had vanished. Ah! I completely forgot about that strange fellow. After a quick look around, Shaltir discovered that the man had turned his back to her, and was busy jumping down into an alley. He must have made his move while she was distracted. There's no way a mere mortal could escape unscathed from me. If she used magic to slow down the flow of time, she could catch up to him before he even hit the ground. Without hesitation, Shaltir cast her spell. Time Accelerator. The world felt thick and viscous around Shaltir as she moved through it at incredible speeds, heading towards the place the man would land. As she descended, she observed his posture as he leapt down with glacial slowness. Although she could not harm him directly while the spell was in effect, she could still set up an ambush and make other preparations. Just as well. I'll open my arms to receive him as he falls. Surely a human like him will be overjoyed to be embraced by a full-figured beauty like myself. The corner of Shaltir's mouth quirked up as she thought of the expression that she would see on his face. As she landed on the ground, just before the spell ended, she sensed another presence close by. What's this? It was a young man in a suit of pure white plate armor, with a roguish-looking companion. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. Brain landed in the alley, and looked back up, but Shaltir was no longer there. She didn't pursue me? No, that's not right. What if she wants me to lead her to the others, like last time? He had not planned to flee at first. His thoughts had been that it would be easier to buy time for climb, and the rest by escaping to lower ground. Brain's every action had been to let climb escape. It was because of that he had put on this entire show of running away. But as he ran, he discovered something that should not have been there. That something was Climb and the thief, who were waving to him. How could this? Brain's mind filled with emotion, intense anger and frustration. His face distorted by wrath, he charged towards the two of them, grabbed them by the collar, and kept running. This was obviously slower than just running by himself, but Brain was not calm enough to have considered that. After they had run for some distance, and after checking repeatedly behind him to make sure that Shaltir had not caught up with them, he slammed Climb against a nearby wall. Because Brain had not thought to control his strength, Climb practically bounced off it. Why? Why didn't you run? Although his emotions were on the verge of overflowing, Brain still had enough presence of mind to keep himself from shouting out loud. That was. Brain grabbed hold of Climb again. That was what? Were you worried about me? I clearly told you to escape. Wait, I don't know what happened, but back then, you just said some stuff and ran off. The fault isn't Climbcoin's alone. After hearing the thief's words, Brain began to calm down. It was true that he hadn't explained anything at all. He forced himself to take deep breaths. Forgive me, Climbcoin. I seem to have gone a little mad. Ah, no, you must forgive me too, for not heeding your words. No, I was the one at fault, and I am truly sorry. Things just happened. Hey, Unglao-san, what happened? We may not have known each other very long, but just now, you seemed like a completely different person, like a novice who just picked up the sword. Stopping here is very dangerous. I'll tell you once we move. Let's just say I met a monster who could give Sabas-san a run for his money. The three of them moved on warily. It might have been sheer luck that they had not met Jaldabaoth's underlings while they were fleeing, but counting on that luck to continue would only end badly. Then, you're unhurt, so it must have been a complete victory, right? Or no, you settled it with words? Not so. It was with the sword. I cut her fingernail off. Brain was filled with glee as he said it. There was no mistake about it. He, Brain Unglaus, had clipped the nail of the monster Shaltir Bloodfallen. I cut her fingernail off, Brain repeated. He was trying his best to control the overflowing joy that welled up from the depths of his heart, but even so, he was practically trembling with emotion. I see. Cutting a fingernail off. I guess doing it with a sword is pretty impressive. The thief shook his head and trembled slightly. That nail belonged to someone who could rival Seiba-sama. Don't you think she must have been very strong? Is that so? As expected of Brain Unglaus, Brain struggled to contain his girlish excitement as he was showered in praise. He shook his head to clear these foolish ideas from it. Climb, Koen, no, climb. After seeing Seiba-sama you should know, right? There are people stronger than me everywhere. Even someone like Momom the Black has probably reached Seiba-sama's level too. So keep this in mind, when I tell you to run, run. Even if you try and help, you'll just get in the way. Please promise me, next time, don't question what I say and just do it. I understand. Then that's good. You're serving the princess, right? Because of that, you could endure Seiba-sama's killing intent, right? Then make sure you keep your priorities straight. Brain patted Climb on the shoulder, and looked back at the direction from which they had fled. Why? Why hasn't she pursued me yet? Is there some reason? I totally didn't expect her to show up here. Was it because of the warehouse district? Brain recalled Renner's words. Could it be that she was looking for the same item as Jaldabaoth? If that's the case, wouldn't that make her one of Jaldabaoth's agents? Since a monster like Shaltir had shown up, the only sensible thing to do would be to abandon the mission and flee right away, but would Climb be able to do that? Since he had already heard Brain's lecture, he would probably listen to Brain and escape. Would that really be a good thing? It was obviously good to be concerned for Climb's safety, but people sometimes chose to put their lives in danger for the sake of something else, and being ordered by Renner on this suicide mission was such an occasion. Brain did not know what kind of life Climb had lived before he earned his name, or how he had served the Golden Princess afterward. Even so, Brain did not think it would be wise to unnecessarily interfere with Climb's determination to carry out Renner's orders. Brain pulled the thief over, and spoke to him after making sure Climb couldn't see or hear them talk. Hey, do you think it was a good idea to bring Climb here? Wouldn't it be better to make sure he went home safe rather than completing the mission? You're a big old softy, aren't you? Enough with that nonsense. And considering you're the one who volunteered to be the emergency stand-in for this suicide mission, I think you're the bigger softy. The thief laughed nervously, and then looked at the confused youth who was facing them. How shall I put it? Seeing a kid like him fight so hard made me remember the days when I was still young, even if it was just for a while. I think I understand how you feel about this too. Even so, the thief's eyes shone with a sharp and brilliant conviction. It was the path he chose. We have no right to force him off it. Brain sighed. I'm interested in that brat too. I'm pretty certain how he feels about the princess, judging by the look in his eye and the way he reacts when put in danger. Hell of a kid, isn't he? He's got a thoughtless and crazy wish in his heart. Because of that, he's like a thief who's set his eyes on the kingdom's most valuable treasure. That's right. He might still die, but at least he'll have chosen it. With that, Brain made up his mind. Then, we'd best get a move on. Don't know when Shaltir might catch up with us. Part 2 Lower Fire Month, 9th month, 5th day, 3:38. The adventurers from the palace retreated past the barricade to the rear. The guards they passed through had been ordered to hold the line until the adventurers' wounds could be healed. Once the adventurers had passed through the opening in the barricade, it was immediately filled up again with planks and other debris. Nobody else remained in front of the barricade. This meant that this was the front line. Looking back, the guards could see the ragged adventurers as they limped towards the rear. Fresh claw and scorch marks adorned their armor, as did the sprays of fresh blood. Further behind that was the wall of fire burning in the background. They had penetrated roughly 150 meters into enemy territory. Indeed, judging by the dread that the once familiar capital had inspired in them, it felt like a foreboding, alien world, enemy territory indeed. The adventurers had spent time wrecking the surrounding houses and tearing parts of them down to form a barricade. The guards had thought it would be a useful obstacle, but now it seemed puny and insignificant. It felt like it would crumble at the first sign of serious resistance. It's okay. The demons haven't pursued the adventurers. The enemy hasn't chosen to attack, they're just shoring up their defense. No problems. They won't attack. Someone else was repeating these words again. They were meant to mask his anxiety and embodied his wish to return home alive. He repeated his prayer to his god. There were 45 men manning the barricade. They carried long spears and wore leather armor. Among these was a man in a helmet, Bona Ingri. He was one of several guard captains mobilized tonight. Though he had the title of captain, in truth he was no different than the other guards. His physique was nothing special, nor was his mind particularly sharp. The younger guards were stronger and faster than him. He had made it to this position simply because he had served as a guard until he was 40, and because there was nobody else to fill it. His face turned pale, and his hands gripped his spear so tightly the edges of his fingers turned white. Looking closely, one could see that his legs were trembling. His gaze was fixed forward solely because he did not want to see something horrible. His entirely unreliable posture only increased the guards' unease further. Then again, it was to be expected, considering this was the first time their lives would actually be on the line in a battle. The kingdom fought with the empire every year, sending troops to the Katsa Plain. But the guards were tasked with the protection of the city, and thus they were not dispatched to the front lines. Because of this, the position of city guard was coveted by those citizens who did not want to fight against the empire. But now they had ample experience dealing with squabbles between drunken peasants, but there had never been a case where they had to fight to the death. Because of that, their fear grew even further. The only reason they did not break and flee was because they knew running away would be an unforgivable sin. Even if they were somehow absolved, they would still be guilty of not protecting the city properly. That was the sole reason why they had not been sent to the front. If they failed in doing that, then they would surely be forced into the front lines during the next war with the empire. I'm going to quit my job as a guard if I make it through this in one piece. Bona grumbled to himself quietly, and many of the people around him agreed. Do you still remember what the adventurers said? Are we talking about what to do if we encounter hellhounds, greater hellhounds, gazer devils and demon swarms? That's right. Does anyone know anything about fighting demons? Especially their weak points, what they're bad at, that sort of thing. Nobody answered, they were too busy looking at each other. Bona's expression conveyed how useless he thought they were without having to say a word. When he saw dissatisfaction on some of the others' faces, he looked away and slammed the butt of his spear into the ground. Damn it! Can't those adventurers explain better? The adventurers who had shared their knowledge with the guards had been heavily wounded, and were falling back as fast as they could. Just telling them the name of the enemy was all they could do, let alone telling them how they looked like, or how to fight them. However, it would be too harsh on the adventurers to solely blame them for this situation. There was no proper communication between the guards and the adventurers, and as a result the amount of information being shared was low. In fact, forming the defense line out of guards who didn't know anything could be blamed on the senior guards as well. Also, not all guards were uninformed about the demons. Under different circumstances, some of them might have learned something about the enemy. One such platoon of guards had sent some of their members to help the adventurers retreating past them, and had learned a lot in the process. This group, however, had not done so because their leader was frozen with fear, and had not even turned to look at the retreating adventurers, and he certainly did not want to decrease the amount of troops guarding the barricade by assisting the adventurers. They're paid more than us to do the same job. They should fight harder. Until they die. Several men nodded as Bona shouted. Our lives are at risk too. Those guys shouldn't be running off and leaving it all to us. Bona called out to the nearby guards. Those further away stared coldly at him, while the ones closer to him yelled out their displeasure with the adventurers as well. They're here. At the sound of the lookouts' voices, Bona looked like he had been choked. Everyone's eyes filled with the shapes of the demons loping towards them from the shadowed street. At their head was a demon that looked like a cross between a man and a frog. Its skin was a jaundiced yellow, gleaming with a sticky, shiny coating. Its body was covered in huge lumps which looked like human faces pressed out against its skin from the inside. A mouth that could swallow a man in one gulp gaped open, and an abnormally long tongue began tasting the air. Around it were hellhounds, waiting for their prey. After that were demons which looked like a human being that had been skinned, and its exposed musculature painted with some kind of slimy black liquid. There were 15 hounds, one swollen-bodied demon covered in faces, and 6 of the flayed demons. "There's too many." Bona cried like the tolling of a bell. "We can't hold them. Run." "Damn it," came the angry retort. "Shut the hell up." Ignoring Bona's wails of despair, the guards looked to their comrades, tension knotting up their faces. "Listen up. All you need to do is stick them with the pointy end. Our job isn't to kill them. It's to buy time. It's not hard. We're all going to make it. We're going to make it." Some people repeated that cry, and then it was taken up by others. "Hell yeah. Let's go." Even the guards with terrified faces grabbed their spears and got into their ranks. "You come join us too." Someone grabbed Bona and dragged him to his place. There was no time for playing around. The demonic beasts howled and began tearing down the barricade at an incredible speed. The guards' spears stabbed out at them from between the ever-widening gaps in the barricade. The pained wails of the hellhounds rose up from all around them. Those demonic beasts that had not been stabbed hastily fled the barricade. They howled mournfully as they paced around the barricade, as though assessing the situation. Some of the more collected guards thrust their spears through the gaps at the nearer hellhounds, which drove them away. Slowly, the faces of the guards began to cheer up. The demons in the back had disgusting grins on their faces, and the guards were still uneasy, because they didn't know what the demons would do. However, letting time pass like this was still good. After all, their job was not to defeat the demons. What the? A lone guard cried out as he watched what was happening in front of him. The enemy had formed into a neat line, just barely beyond the reach of the thrusting spears. This was completely different from the wild assault just now. The guards began growing uneasy. If they knew what the hellhounds were up to, maybe they could have changed their formation, or done something about it. As it was, all they could do was thrust their spears between the gaps. But just when they thought that was all they would have to do, the demonic beasts opened their maws, so widely that it looked as though they were dislocated. One could see red within their throats. Jets of crimson flame shot out in unison at the barricade, engulfing the entire thing in fire. The guards' eyes could see nothing but red. Although the fire was intense, it still could not burn down the barricades within a few seconds. This did not make much difference to the guards on the other side, though. Screams broke out all around. Some had their eyes burned up, others had their lungs and gullets scorched because they inhaled the flames. In the end, all of them fell like flies. The only guards to survive were the ones at the sides, because the ones in the center were no longer breathing after being consumed by the flame. We're doomed. The words nobody wanted to say escaped from Bona's mouth. His movements thereafter were remarkably fast, as he threw down his spear, and discarded his helmet, all to let him flee faster. The remaining guards were stunned. They had considered retreating, of course, but none of them had fled with such amazing skill as him. Bona ran away with a speed that was hard for human beings to follow. The surviving guards looked on slack-jawed as Bona's back faded into the distance. However, his flight was abruptly halted by a demon falling out of the sky. The swollen-bodied demon flew without wings, and landed squarely on Bona's back, making a cracking noise like dried branches snapping as it did. Bona cried out in pain. Though it could have killed him easily, the demon did not do so. However, that was most definitely not an act of mercy. The demon opened its mouth and swallowed Bona whole. Its distended belly hardly changed even as it ingested him. No, there was a new swelling, with a human face on it. Though it was hard to tell, it looked like it belonged to Bona. Even as the sound of the barricade being torn down reached their ears, the guards did not move. So much for being an obstacle. Against demons, it was little more than a pile of matchsticks. The demons who broke through the barricade encircled the guards. A strangled cry came up from them, for they knew they would certainly die here. It was answered by the laughter of the surrounding demons, mocking the foolishness of these humans. One of the guards looked to the sky, praying for his god to save him. Instead, he saw something bizarre in the night sky. He saw a group of strange-looking people flying towards them at high speed. Two of them were supporting a third, who was wearing jet-black plate armor. He was wrapped in a crimson cape and carrying a gigantic sword in each hand. "Throw me." Though they seemed far away, the voice carried clearly over the distance. The two flying supporters released their grip. The dark warrior picked up speed, as though he had been pushed forward by some force from behind, tracing a trajectory downward that ended in the middle of the road. He skidded across the ground as though there were no friction, only managing to break after chopping off the head of a hellhound in passing. Both sides paused to watch this outrageously dramatic entry. The silence was deafening. "I am the adventurer, Momom. Fall back. I'll take over." At first, the soldiers were unable to comprehend what the warrior of darkness had just said to them. Then, the howls of several hellhounds brought them back to reality. He was the savior that they needed. Hellhounds. That's all of them? Even twice the number wouldn't be enough. The hellhounds sprang at the dark warrior Momom from all sides. In seconds they had enveloped him, forming a cordon from which there was no escape. Even if he tried to parry them with a sword, he would be torn apart by the surrounding hellhounds. Even if he tried to sweep them away, he would still be mauled to death by the rest of the beasts. Being hit by a leaping hellhound's charge would break his balance, and leave him unable to defend against the attacks that would follow. This was a brutal strategy that leveraged on superior numbers to win. The anguish on the face of the guards was only natural, but none of them knew what true power was. The gigantic sword slashed, and a mighty wind followed in its wake. Everyone present was speechless. That was a single swing of his blade. A normal person would only have been able to bring one hound down at most. However, just as the sword's wielder was no mere human, that stroke was not something a mere human could do. That single blow cleaved through four of the seemingly invincible hellhounds that the guards had no hope of defeating. Momom turned with the force of his swing, though he had slightly lost his balance because he had used all his strength. There were still other hellhounds left, and now it seemed impossible for him to avoid their attacks. Even though he wore a suit of sturdy plate armor, the hellhounds had sharp teeth and claws that could rend steel. And there would be no way to survive unscathed after being attacked by that many hellhounds. In the guards' eyes, they imagined the adventurer who had come to save them taking countless wounds. However, they had been far too presumptuous, after all. Momom did not try to forcibly regain his balance, but turned with the momentum. The crimson cape fluttered, like a cyclone of fire. With graceful steps that almost looked like dancing, Momom stepped lightly upon the ground, while his sword spun in a horizontal sweep from left to right, roaring as they went. The remaining hellhounds were cut apart, their bodies flung far into the distance by the power of his swings. Any hellhounds who could still move were long gone. Just 2 hits? The murmuring from one guard represented the words in their hearts. Or rather, after seeing the majesty of this display, they had nothing else to say. Next up, an overeating and gazer devils, huh? Such meaningless opponents. After muttering to himself, Momom strode over to the demons. There was no caution or wariness in his footsteps. It was as though he were walking through a park. Normally, the guards would have called out to him to stop, but after seeing his prowess, nobody could even think of doing that. The only thing mere mortals could do was watch the back of a great warrior as he went to work. Unable to bear the encroaching pressure that came from the man approaching him so casually, the gazer devils roared and leapt at him. There was a flash of light. The dismembered parts of their corpses flew in all directions. Momom had not broken his stride for even a single second. He continued walking, as though the gazer devils had never existed, with an ease like he was alone in the wilderness. Incredible. As though reacting to the guard's words, the overeating opened its maw. It was like the jaws of those snakes which could open up and swallow their prey whole. In its depths, one could see the flickers of fires within. The tormented expressions intensified on the faces pressed out from the inside of its body, and theirs were the screams of souls condemned to a fate worse than death. The overeating could consume the souls of its victims to produce a wail that would terrify and kill any living creature. However, before that, its head had been chopped off. The thrown sword sprouted from its body as the head fell to the ground. There's no problem if you kill it before it can wail. With that, Momom walked over and wrenched his sword out of the corpse. In just a few tens of seconds, he had exterminated the demons the guards thought were impossible to beat. The guards cried out. It was the joyous sound of men who had been granted a miraculous reprieve from death. Though bathed in praise, Momom took no notice of it, and instead spoke calmly to the guards. After this, I will be moving to lead the adventurers' counterattack. You fellows need to hold the line for just a little longer. Well, I guess since I've already taken these guys out, the next wave won't be coming so soon. Nabe, Evil Eye, you can come get me now. The two magic casters descended from the sky to pick Momom up. As he rose into the air, Momom turned to say one last thing to the guards. I'm going to take out the enemy leader. Until then, please protect the civilians behind you. I'm counting on you guys. As they watched Momom fly from the area, the guards sighed. After what that hero had said to them, nobody could possibly complain about defending this area with their lives. Oi! Get the roadblocks up. We need to get ready to stop the enemy's advance again. Worry about what happens when it gets torn down later. Diamond suit, lower fire month, 9th month, 5th day, 344. Lakyus stood at the head of the assault team that was formed of Mithril and Orichalcum ranked adventurers. Tina was by her side too, and together they advanced. Before she set out, Lakyus had heavily considered her position. Anyone who could use resurrection magic should not be on the front lines. However, Lakyus' absence would lead to a huge drop in fighting power. Since the priority was to get Momom safely to Jaldabaoth, it stood to reason that Lakyus should not stay in the back. They avoided the route Momom had taken, instead choosing to take one that led them to a location which had a barricade manned by guards. All they saw on the way there were streets painted in blood, with chunks of shredded meat scattered everywhere. Of course, the barricade had been destroyed so thoroughly that there was no sign it had ever existed to begin with. In order not to make too much noise, the adventurers formed up into a group and crept ahead. However, after only about 30 meters of movement, they turned a corner and were beset by demons. At the start of the battle, the adventurers, with their high personal combat ability, enjoyed an overwhelming advantage in combat. Gradually, however, the balance of power began to shift. This was because their opponents had a numerical advantage that overwhelmed the adventurers' prowess in single combat. Their numbers were so great that it seemed as though every demon in the area had converged on them. Hold fast. Keep fighting. Lakyus called out while casting her group support spell. Of course, none of the adventurers would retreat. They knew how important this battle was. In contrast with Evil Eye's task, which was to eliminate the trash that tried to get in Momom's way, their task was to put pressure on the demons and keep them from spreading out. In that sense, fighting so many demons head-on was, in a way, Momom's greatest support. The longer they fought here, the higher Momom's chances of victory would be. War cries and the clashing of steel blended together, and the sound of spells being cast and special abilities being used, like flame breath burning up human bodies, blended together in a chaotic mix. After Lakyus confirmed the situation, her face contorted. The words of a certain adventurer stuck in her mind. The demons have become stronger. Could it be that they had opened the door to the demon world, and summoned even more powerful demons? Was the wall of fire the boundary between this world and the next? What would happen if they let things progress over time? Even if they defeated Jaldabaoth, could they restore the capital to peace? Would this all be for nothing? There's no point thinking about this. As she shouted it out, Lakyus' countless worries dispersed. If she did not give it a try, she would never know. For that reason, Lakyus drew her sword. Shoot! One of the floating swords hovering at her shoulders rose up and shot out at her command. With a speed that split the air, it pierced a leaping hellhound right through the mouth, destroying it without leaving so much as a corpse behind. Looking around, Lakyus realized they had been surrounded. The advance which had just begun had halted, and since they were encircled by multiple layers of the enemy, there was no chance of relief. There was nothing to do but fight. The vanguard cast aside their broken weapons and drew their spares. The magic casters who had run out of mana used their scrolls or wands to cast their spells instead. They were running on fumes. The outer ring of adventurers were orichalcum ranked, while the mithril ranked defended the wounded in the middle, and the magic casters who had run out of mana. This is bad. If this keeps up, we'll be worn down and defeated. Haven't they done it yet? Haven't they defeated Jaldabaoth yet? A cry rang out, and as Lakyus turned her head, she saw a warrior who had been knocked down by a demon. TCH. Before Lakyus could move, Tina was charging at the demon, filling the gap that had been formed. The fallen warrior was carried off by other adventurers. It was good that he was still alive, but the situation was still very bad. The fact that nobody was casting healing spells was a clear sign that the mana of the priests who used divine magic was completely depleted. We have to fall back. If their lines were broken, they would be routed in an instant. Lakyus could not let them die like this. She considered what might happen if Momom were to be defeated, and realized that she would have to be very careful about it. Retreating while completely worn out would be extremely difficult. It would be better to fall back while they still had the strength to do so. Fall. Just as Lakyus was about to give the command to retreat, she gasped as a new demon descended from the sky. It was roughly 3 meters tall, and its muscular body was covered in reptilian scales. It had a tail that resembled a snake. Its head was a goat skull, and its eyes were beacons of bluish-white fire in empty black sockets. In its mighty arms, it held a gigantic maul. It spread the bat-like wings on its back. With a flap of its wings, it sent a wave of freezing air cascading forth, and a wave of soul-shattering terror accompanied it. Although they had fear-resistance magic cast, and thus did not panic, this was a clear demonstration of the power of this demon, which was stronger than any they had encountered so far. Sweat flowed like a river. This is bad. With ample mana, and the adventuring parties at full strength, they would probably have been able to beat it. If they could just learn more about their opponent and fight it later, they would definitely have triumphed, but right now, none of these conditions were present. Evil Eye, who was very knowledgeable, and could use powerful magic, was not here. Gagarin, who could defend against her opponent's blows and immediately press the advantage to counterattack, was not here. Tia, who could deftly evade her enemies' attacks and attack them with her ninjutsu, was not here either. The only ones here were 2 tired people. She looked over to Tina, who nodded to show that she was ready to die here. Lakyus closed both her hands around the hilt of Kiliniram, and began walking toward the demon. At this moment, a nearby orichalcum-ranked adventurer grabbed her shoulder and shouted. "We'll hold him back. You should escape." Seeing the look of surprise on Lakyus' face, he continued speaking. "If you're alive, you can use resurrection magic. Because of that, you have to make it back alive, no matter what. The rest of us are counting on you to revive us." The man smiled, his expression filled with masculine charm. It was a smile that suited an orichalcum-ranked adventurer like him. The adventurers around him nodded in unison. When one thought calmly about it, they were right. Rather than prepare herself to die, she should prepare herself to live, so she could extend a lifeline to the ones who would fall in battle. The material components for a resurrection spell are very expensive. How about giving us a discount? Hey, didn't you say you wanted to be the pride of the princess, or something? Let the damn nobles pay for it. They've certainly got the coin. And just like that, as though they were going for a picnic, several adventurers peeled off from the huddled group. There was no discussion, not even a glance in each other's eyes. They simply walked out in perfect synchronization to stand before the demon. Seeing the carefree way in which they went to their deaths, Lakyus bit her lip and turned away. Break out with all your strength. As long as you can walk away in the end, it'll be fine. With that, Lakyus charged the demonic hordes, raising Kiliniram in her hands. She trusted her defense entirely to her armor and her magic. Abandoning the nearly broken defensive line, she prepared to carve a crimson road through the demons. It felt like she was being ripped to shreds, her flesh pierced by daggers, forcing Lakyus to grit her teeth against the pain that assailed her. From a detached point of view, she knew that her body was nearing its limits, so she cast a silent healing spell. Although Lakyus absolutely had to survive this encounter, she could not do it without exerting herself to her utmost. Hiya! Lakyus channeled most of her remaining mana into Kiliniram. The stars in its body began to shine with an unearthly radiance, and the body of the blade swelled up as well. Super move. Dark Blade Mega Impact. With a horizontal sweep, black power flowed out in a vast, slashing wave. The lower-ranking demons were reduced to sightless atoms by the explosive burst of non-elemental energy. Strictly speaking, calling the attack was not necessary, but if it worked, it worked. However, still, not enough. Lakyus' tired eyes could only see a veritable wall of low-tier demons. Although she had just blown away so many of them in one stroke, the breach she made had been immediately filled back up. Could she break through? Lakyus' unease began growing again. Kiliniram had returned to its original dimensions. At this moment, Lakyus saw behind the demons, a flash of metal, the roar